Ever wish schools had like a way to see problems before they actually happen? Kind of like a crystal ball, but for safety.
Interesting.
Well, we're diving into something that might feel kind of like that today, using something called predictive analytics to keep students safe.
Yeah, it's definitely a fast-growing area, and using data to figure out and address potential safety issues is really powerful, but you really got to be careful about how you go about it.
Yeah, for sure. So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this white paper from Samscloud.
Okay.
They're a company that focuses on school security solutions. So we're using their materials like a starting point to understand how this tech is being used and developed. We're not saying we agree with everything they do, of course.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely a good place to start to kind of explore this whole world of predictive analytics in schools.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the first thing is, what exactly is predictive analytics? It sounds kind of sci-fi, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. It's not like you can actually see the future or anything like that. But what it does is it takes all this data from the past and looks for patterns that might hint at what might happen later on.
Okay.
Kind of like spotting trends, but way more data and some pretty fancy analysis behind it.
So is it kind of like if a student's grades suddenly drop,
Mm.
or they're missing a lot of classes and they just seem really withdrawn?
Mm-hmm.
The system might flag that and be like, okay,
Yeah.
this could be something we need to look at.
Exactly, yeah. So like those things by themselves might not be that big of a deal, right? But if you see them all together, that could be a sign of a bigger problem. And so predictive analytics can help teachers and staff notice those patterns maybe before anyone else would, and they can step in before a small thing turns into a big thing.
Yeah, so instead of waiting for something really bad to happen, schools can kind of try to support those students earlier on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's actually one of the main things that Samscloud talks about in their white paper. They're trying to use their system to do just that.
Okay, so what kind of tech are they using? I mean, like, how does all this actually work?
So one thing they talk about is geofencing.
Geofencing.
Yeah. So imagine like a virtual fence around the school, right? And if a student leaves that area when they shouldn't, the system will let the staff know.
Okay.
This could be really important for like younger students or maybe students with special needs.
So it's not just like reacting after something happens. It's also about preventing things from happening in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. They also talk a lot about this idea of real-time incident reporting.
Okay.
So if a teacher or someone on staff sees something that seems off-mating, they can immediately report it through the system.
Okay.
And that makes sure that the right people know about it right away.
Makes sense, because I imagine in those kinds of situations, like, every second counts.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And then maybe the most like advanced tech they talk about is their surveillance system.
Okay, now this is where it starts to sound a little big brother-y.
I could see that.
Like cameras everywhere watching your every move.
It's understandable to be a little creeped out about that. But the key thing is how they're using the tech, right?
Okay.
So Samscloud says their system actually analyzes the footage and tries to spot potential problems.
Okay.
So it could be things like identifying a student who looks like they might be in trouble, or maybe a situation that could turn into a fight.
So it's not just recording everything, it's actually trying to understand what's going on and then flag those potential issues.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so do they have any examples of how well all this works in real schools?
They do. They talk about this one case study at a high school in California where they use the system. They don't go into too much detail because of privacy stuff,
Yeah.
but they say the school was able to spot a problem before it got really serious because of the information from the system.
That's pretty impressive. It sounds like this tech could actually make a big difference in keeping students safe.
Yeah, it definitely has the potential. But it's important to remember that it's just one piece of the puzzle, you know? It's not like a magic wand that fixes everything.
Right, so you can't just rely on computers and data, right?
Right.
You still need people to make judgments and take action based on what they see.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about giving educators and administrators the information they need to make good decisions for their students.
This is all really interesting, but I feel like we've barely scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah. We definitely have a lot more to unpack here, especially when you start thinking about the bigger picture of how this technology could impact students. And you know how it can be used to really help them. So before the break, we were talking about how Samscloud is using this predictive analytics stuff to spot potential safety issues in schools.
Right.
But like you were saying, tech by itself isn't the whole answer.
Yeah, it's really about how they use that tech to actually support the students and make things safer for them.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Samscloud's white paper talks about how they want to go beyond just the usual security stuff and use predictive analytics to actually address more of the needs that students have.
Like what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Well, one thing they talk about is using data to figure out which students might be having problems academically or maybe even emotionally.
Okay.
So, for example, the system could keep track of things like changes in grades, attendance, even how they're acting online, and it could flag students who maybe are at risk of falling behind or maybe they're having mental health issues.
So instead of waiting until like a student is really in crisis mode,
Right.
the system could alert teachers and counselors early on, and they could step in and give them the support they need.
Exactly. It's all about being proactive instead of reactive. And they also talk about using predictive analytics to identify and try to deal with bullying.
Bullying.
Yeah.
Okay. How would that work? I mean, how could a computer system know if someone's being bullied?
Well, the system could look at things like social media interactions and communication patterns. It could even see if there are changes in a student's behavior that might suggest they're being bullied, or maybe they're the ones doing the bullying.
It sounds like this tech could be really helpful. I mean, these are some of the biggest issues that students face today.
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to make a difference. But it also brings up some really important questions about how all this data is collected and used and kept safe.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
We can't just ignore the downsides here.
Yeah.
What are some of the concerns that come to mind?
Well, one big concern is privacy, right? How much information are they collecting on these students, and what are the rules about how that information can be used?
Yeah.
It's super important to have clear guidelines and safeguards to make sure that student privacy is protected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that these systems are being used responsibly and ethically. I mean, what about bias?
Right.
Could the algorithms themselves be biased against certain students?
That's another really important thing to consider. Any system that uses data can potentially just end up reflecting the biases that already exist out there.
Right.
So it's super important to have people involved to make sure the system is being used fairly.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's also about the people who are using it and making sure they're using it the right way.
Exactly. And it takes ongoing evaluation and adjustment to make sure the system is actually doing what it's supposed to do without causing any unintended harm.
This is a lot to think about. I'm starting to see how complicated this whole issue really is.
It definitely is. And I think it's important to remember that this is still a pretty new field.
Yeah.
This technology is changing really fast, and we're just starting to understand what it can do and what the implications are.
Yeah, Samscloud seems to be aware of that. They talk in their white paper about how they're constantly working on their systems and developing new features to try to keep up with the needs of schools.
Yeah, and that's a good sign. It means they're recognizing that this isn't a one-and-done kind of thing. They need to be constantly adapting and improving.
So it's not just about putting the tech in place and walking away.
Right.
It's about having a long-term plan for how it can be used to make things safer and more supportive for all students.
Exactly. And that plan needs to be based on research and open discussion and input from everyone involved: parents, teachers, students, and experts in data privacy and child development.
This has been really eye-opening. It's clear that predictive analytics could really change the way we think about school safety and student well-being, but we have to be smart about it.
I agree. And it's a conversation we need to keep having as this technology keeps evolving and becoming more common.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff in this deep dive, and it seems like predictive analytics could really change the game when it comes to school safety, but it's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Yeah, for sure. We really need to think carefully about how we're using this technology. We want to make sure we're getting the most out of it while also minimizing any potential problems.
Right. So Samscloud ends their white paper with this call to action, basically saying that schools should jump on board with predictive analytics and use it to create safer learning environments. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely important for schools to be aware of what this technology can do, but I think it's crucial for them to have a plan,
Yeah.
not just implement it because it's the shiny new thing.
So it's about understanding how predictive analytics fits into their overall strategy for school safety and student well-being.
Exactly. And it's about talking to everyone involved, parents, teachers, students, even the community, to make sure that what they're doing aligns with their values.
It seems like transparency is a big deal here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People need to know what data is being collected, how it's being used, what safeguards are in place to protect student privacy and make sure everything's fair.
Samscloud does mention that they're committed to using data responsibly and that they're constantly evaluating their systems.
That's good to hear. It sounds like they understand that this technology is always changing and that they need to keep adapting and improving.
It's almost like a partnership between the people who make the technology and the schools that are using it.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about working together to create something that really works for students and educators while still being ethical.
So as we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I think the big takeaway is that predictive analytics has incredible potential to make schools safer and improve the lives of students. But we have to be thoughtful and responsible about how we use it. And we need to be open and transparent about what we're doing.
It's not a magic solution. It's a tool that needs to be used carefully and collaboratively if we really want it to work.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So if you were in charge of designing a school security system using predictive analytics, what would be your top priorities? What safeguards would you put in place? That's something for all of us to think about as we navigate this new world of technology in schools.
Definitely. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Keep the conversation going online using our episode hashtag.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.